Welcome on France 24 to this new edition of the Talk of Paris. Even though we often talk about the strained relationship between Russia and the rest of the world, the Cold War has now been finished for over 20 years. So of what use is NATO? Of what use is the Atlantic Alliance, which was established in the wake of World War II to secure Europe against any possible threat? To answer this question, we went to Brussels, to the headquarters of NATO, where we are welcomed by the man who's at the head of the alliance, has been at the head for 4 years, Jaap Scheffer, who has married a French teacher, a former foreign minister of the Netherlands. Good day, Mr. Secretary General. Of what use is NATO today?
NATO is an organization that provides security and stability. An example of that is Afghanistan. Now, 10 years ago, no one would ever have imagined that NATO would station more than 47,000 men and women in uniform in Afghanistan. Secondly, I'm an Atlantist as General Secretary of NATO, but also I have a very important European role to play. I believe that NATO, as a key organization in discussing transatlantic security issues with our American and Canadian friends, is key to security and stability. In addition, I'm an ambassador to strengthen the links between NATO and the European Union. We share 21 allies who are members of the European Union, but at the same time, the fact that we have the Americans sitting around the table with us every day here at the General Council in Brussels and our Canadian friends on the other side of the ocean makes NATO a unique organization and in a unique position. I believe that NATO will remain unique given its political weight, its military structure that is integrated under Article 5 of the Washington Treaty, military solidarity, political solidarity, and I believe that NATO has demonstrated for almost 60 years that had it not existed, then definitely it has now and certainly a key role to play, and it needs to be invented.
Very well. There's a tradition on this programme to review the career of our guests. As we said earlier, you're a Dutchman. Let's watch this profile by France 24 journalist Carina Chabot.
His job takes him to the world's trouble spots, and he rubs shoulders with world leaders. Jaap Scheffer is NATO's 11th Secretary General. A lover of French literature, he's known for his ability to maintain warm relations on both sides of the Atlantic. NATO's third Dutch leader, he began his career in foreign affairs with a 2-year posting to Ghana, before being sent to NATO's head office in Brussels, a foretaste of the future. But politics drew him home. He joined the Christian Democrats and was elected to Parliament in 1986. 11 years later, he became party head, but after a power struggle resigned as leader just before his party won elections. A setback Scheffer quickly recovered from. He was appointed foreign minister 10 months later and then NATO Secretary General in 2004. A role made to measure for this consummate diplomat. His goal has been to transform and enlarge the multinational body, and he's worked to improve dialogue between Europe and the United States, while Afghanistan has remained a priority throughout. Now, with NATO's 60th birthday coming up next April, Scheffer's 4-year mandate has been extended so he can help plan the festivities.
You say you're very European. However, people sometimes have the feeling that NATO is becoming more and more global, a globalized NATO. Is this the right formula for the future?
I don't think so. NATO has no political ambition, nor the forces, nor the money to be the policeman of the world. A global NATO as a second United Nations, does not exist and must not exist. NATO is not the United Nations. However, in Afghanistan, look at the coalition of some 40 countries with key important partners such as Australia, New Zealand, an important donor and contributor such as Japan, South Korea, Well, given that, NATO recognizes and does have new partners who are truly global partners. We have global challenges today, such as terrorism. The spread of weapons of mass destruction is a global challenge and issue. The fear states, as they're called, is another example of that. It's a global phenomenon. If we are to ensure stability and security under a United Nations mandate, to ensure that globally, well, quite clearly, we need global partners. But there's a difference between being the policeman of the world and having global partners.
In a few days in Bucharest, there will be a NATO summit meeting. George Bush will be meeting Vladimir Putin. Nicolas Sarkozy will be confirming an increase in the French military presence in Afghanistan. Why is this summit meeting so important in your view?
Our challenge in the 21st century, we have anti-missile defenses, we have cyber defense, we have energy security, and NATO in the 21st century must find a response to the challenges of our age.
We know that there are disagreements in NATO, notably regarding the incorporation of Georgia and Ukraine. Will there be any agreement on this in Bucharest?
I hope so. It's no news when I tell you that 26 democracies within NATO do come together and talk to take important decisions. Currently, we are reviewing and discussing a number of requests filed by the Ukraine and Georgia to enter into the so-called Membership Action Plan of NATO. We've taken no firm decision or drawn any firm conclusion on that as yet, but I hope that we will be able to discuss that in Bucharest.
Some people are wondering why NATO has invited Vladimir Putin to discuss with George Bush issues such as NATO, the alliance, the anti-missile shield. It seems a bit curious.
10, 11 years back, the NATO-Russian Council then was founded, and it was the first time, and that's why it is important that President Putin has now decided to accept and take up our invitation to come to Bucharest. For the first time that we have a meeting then between the NATO Council and Russia bringing together heads of state. Now, of course, we agree on some points and others on which we do not agree, but we're using the NATO Council with Russia to discuss those issues that we do not necessarily agree upon.
But the Russians have again said that the enlargement of NATO was a threat to world peace, and they're speaking of a return to the Cold War. What do you say to this?
I don't think the Cold War is totally ended as such. However, what I'm saying is, rather than the enlargement of NATO in the Balkans raises a problem for our Russian friends, on the other hand, if the perception in Moscow then on the Membership Action Plan then Ukraine and Georgia is one that probably it may be misunderstood and mislead, but it's a perception no more than that. So is dialogue possible? Yes, but the final decision will be taken by the 26 allies, the 26 members of NATO, without a veto or a right to look at on the others from the other side.
So, no right of veto, no right to be consulted on the enlargement of NATO.
Not only for Russia, but the enlargement of NATO is a NATO decision, a decision taken by the allies.
Let's get back to a concrete issue, the timetable, the prospect of Ukraine and Georgia joining NATO. Let's listen to this question, which arrived on our website, France 24 website, by a Georgian student.
Mr. Secretary General, I would like to know when Europe will stop being so reserved when it comes to Georgia's membership in NATO. This despite the opposition of Russia, which continues to exercise power over the Caucasus, even though the Soviet Union fell apart back in 1991.
You say Russia has no right of veto, but this Georgian student is saying that NATO and the Europeans give in too easily to pressures from Russia. Do you give in to Russia?
My reply to that is that NATO's door remains open quite clearly. Now, at the appropriate time, If Georgia wishes to draw closer to NATO, it will do that. We will step up then our dialogue with Georgia. Now, we cannot say that NATO's door is closed to Georgia. It is open to Georgia, as it is to the Ukraine, because the Washington Treaty clearly states that our door is open to European democracy.
Yes, but not this year. The door isn't open this year.
We're not yet discussing the fact that Georgia would become a member of NATO. We are discussing the membership action plan.
An action plan for joining NATO.
It's on drawing closer together Georgia and NATO.
How long will this take?
I don't know. At the end of the day, we need a consensus within NATO on that point. As you know, all decisions within NATO are taken on the basis of a consensus. At the current time, as we prepare for the Bucharest Summit, we are now discussing Georgia's and Ukrainians' aim to enter the membership action plan. I will not hide the fact that currently there are allies who have different opinions on that.
So the consensus doesn't exist?
Not yet. Hopefully we will end on a basis on a consensus, because without a consensus there will be no decision.
Let's see what the Europeans and the Americans think of NATO through this survey conducted with the International Herald Tribune and the Harris Interactive Institute on NATO's image, on the anti-missile shield. Let's look at the results of this survey.
Europeans don't know much about NATO, but support for it has increased since its creation in 1949. 52% of Germans and 38% of Italians claim to know a bit about NATO, but can't define its main role. Almost half of the French and Spanish people polled said they don't really know what it stands for. In spite of this, NATO is still backed by 55% of the French, 54% of Americans, and 67% of Germans. France is divided on whether it should rejoin NATO's integrated military command. A third of the French support this move, while another third oppose it. Meanwhile, Germans and Italians largely back a return to French military involvement by 61% and 62%. Europeans are, however, strongly opposed to an American plan for a new anti-missile defence system in Central Europe. 71% of Germans and 61% of Spanish people are hostile to the project, while Americans broadly support it. Among those questioned, especially the Italians, British and the Germans, most said they preferred a joint NATO-Russian anti-missile shield instead.
Your comment on this poll?
That's a pretty favourable result for NATO. We need to explain, though, we at NATO and our governments need to explain that security in Afghanistan is directly correlated to security for people in Limoges, in parts of France, in Amsterdam, in the Netherlands and elsewhere. But it's more complicated than when I was younger. During the Cold War, NATO blocked the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union no longer exists. The Russians are our partners, and now we have Afghanistan. The question in Afghanistan is why defend key values, universal values? That is the question. We need to explain that. On the other hand, then I note that NATO, as an alliance, as an institution, is supported by a large number of different parties and circles, and that's very important as well. We realize that NATO does have its right to exist, that NATO plays a key role as a coalition. I will welcome the fact, and I certainly will favour the fact that when France then takes its full place within NATO, then and that decision will be taken by the French government, then certainly that's not a decision for other allies to take, but a French decision to take, and I will welcome the fact when that time comes. And I would also immediately add here that France plays a key role within NATO. France is in all our operations in Afghanistan, in Kosovo, and so on. But it would need to retrieve its full place, I believe. That is an important political decision to take.
But there's strong opposition to the anti-missile defence system on the part of the Europeans, especially the Germans and the French.
I believe.
Are you surprised by this?
So, that does not surprise me, but at the same time, we need to bear in mind that here we have a major challenge with regard to the spread of weapons of mass destruction and then ballistic then capabilities to transport those weapons. Now, the worst case scenario would be that those weapons fall into the hands of terrorists. I believe that we need transparency here with our Russian partners. We're going to have a discussion on that in Bucharest, and that our allies, I hope, will meet then to develop different options.
But what about the public opinion, which is against the anti-missile system?
Obviously, we need to inform public opinion in the best way possible, which is something we've always apparently done. My message to public opinion is that we need to defend ourselves in Europe as well, not only in America, but also in Europe, against the major danger of ballistic missiles and the spread of weapons of mass destruction. I believe that France, a nuclear country with a nuclear capability, is now realizing, and I have been following your French president's addresses then on the subject on several occasions. He has said that that is a real threat. It is a threat. We at NATO must therefore find a response to it.
Very well, that brings us to the end of the first part of this programme. Let's catch up on the latest news on France 24. Join us in a few minutes. Stay with us.